Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unfiltered, the podcast dedicated to the progression of the fluid power and automation industries. I'm Meghann Cook, and today it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Willie Harbert to the show.
Again,
Hi, Willie.
thanks
How
for
are you?
having me.
Yeah,
Great. Yes.
absolutely. Thanks for taking the time. So, Willie, why don't you tell us about yourself and also how you got into the fluid power industry?
Great. Well, I spent about 20 years in the fluid power industry, the first 17 being with Eaton, and then obviously the 4 years ago, Danfoss acquired Eaton, so spent 3 years with Danfoss. My last job being the vice president of Orbital Motors for Danfoss and Eaton, which are probably the two places, as the place where both companies got started in hydraulics, actually from the same person, Lynn Charleston, who licensed the technology to Danfoss, and then eventually Eaton bought his company. It's a pretty unique story and an exciting story. But I started out in my first introduction to fluid power was in the Navy. I was a Navy nuclear submarine officer, and to earn your dolphins on a submarine, you have to learn every system on a submarine. And the planes and the rudder and the mast and everything are obviously, these are high power density applications, and they're all hydraulically actuated. And I just remember when I was doing one of my interviews on the hydraulic systems, I was drawing everything, and they said, you forgot something. It's pretty important. It was an accumulator on the system. I was like, oh, I forgot the accumulator. And I just remember that because I thought, oh, I should have known that. And then on the pneumatic side, obviously, submarines do what's called emergency blows, which are like when if there's flooding or anything, you get hit or something like that. There's high pressure air that flows through the ballast tanks that pops up the submarine like a balloon. Obviously, that's pneumatic valves and actuators. So that's my first experience on a submarine. Pretty critical components as part of a submarine. And then after I was in the Navy for 6 years, and then after I got out, I joined Eaton, and then that's where I transitioned to more exposure, kind of slowly to fluid power. So my first main job in Eaton was actually in an industrial clutch and brake manufacturer called Airflex, and I was on the operations side, but they were all pneumatically actuated. They also had accessories like we called them quick release valves and what we called rotor seals. They're rotary unions that allowed the air to flow through to actuate the actual brakes and clutches. And then eventually I moved to the Twin Cities about 14 years ago, where I got into the heart of fluid power and with Eaton and a wide variety of roles.
Yeah, you have an impressive career going there, Willie, certainly. So over the years, and this can be going back to the Navy and then your time at Eaton, as far as projects go, what would you consider your most fun and or important project that you worked?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to bucket it into one big bucket and maybe go to like some sub buckets. I think the biggest thing about fluid power, and I wasn't a fluid power engineer or anything, but it's about partnerships. And I think particularly in the United States, partnerships are critical, whether it be the distribution partnerships. I saw you interviewed Mike McVeigh from Cross, and I know Mike. The collaborating with distribution, and they do everyday innovation, whether it's big or small or whatever it is, and just seeing all those projects, grinders and shredders, et cetera, attachment business, especially on the motor side, it's always been very exciting. So I think partnerships have always been important. I had a chance to help acquire and then run a business where we acquired technology from a Scottish partner, where we made these big, large industrial motors. And when I say large industrial motors, I'm talking about 2-liter motors, large, maybe like 3 foot in diameter. And we call them Hydromac at Eaton. And they were to compete against the Hägglunds motors from Rexroth. And it didn't really work out. But it was just a credible scale and learning experience for me. I also got time to spend time in Edinburgh, Scotland, which is not a bad place to
Not a
be.
bad spot to be. No.
But finally, I think the most important maybe impact was my role as the vice president of the Orbital Motors business. So obviously, as I said, we're bringing together the legacy Eaton Charlene motor, like the heart of what Eaton started as in terms of, and then also the heart of what Danfoss was. And we developed a great product roadmap, and so those motors have been around for decades. And I look forward to there's a product roadmap launching that next generation of motors, and I think you'll see some come out probably at the next Con Expo in Las
Yeah.
Vegas here coming up. So it'll be exciting to see. Probably the most important, and I think once you launch some of these products, they last for 10, 20, 30, 40 years sometimes. So it'll be exciting to see that.
Yeah. Neat. So, in your time in the industry, and specifically, I would say, the past 5 years, the emphasis and the integration of smart technology and IoT. What have you seen in as far as changes go, and just the integration portion? You were mentioning earlier about your distribution partners, which is heavy on that integration side. So, what have you seen in changes in that realm?
Yes, no, I mean, the industry is moving fast, right? With regards to IoT, information and data is always important, right? You can embed nowadays sensors everywhere, whether it's pressure, temperature, location, pretty easily now at fairly low cost. The question has been, how do you use that information to take action, whether that's predictive maintenance, whether that's fuel savings, whether that's, energy optimization or a higher level of control from the feedback systems. So that's progressing. I would say there's two ends of the spectrum, as you mentioned. I think like the large, big OEMs, like a John Deere or somebody like that, they all want to control it themselves, right? Because they want it to be proprietary and differentiated. So that's one path that it's going because they want to try to provide value that's differentiated. And then the other path is through the distributions where we just want information. I think the distributors are doing a good job of providing some of those services. The challenge is not everybody knows exactly what they need. I mean, I think the systems and information like the Danfoss Plus One system has provided some opportunity for that. But we're still on that learning curve, I would say, of how we can better use this. I think, going forward, one of the challenges is this generational shift, right? And you need to have knowledge on the user side too. But you have, maybe more the experienced operators, right, at the end users who what's familiar to them is totally different to what's familiar to a 25-year-old. And as more, people who are more comfortable with the integration of sensors, analytics, control systems, that's going to accelerate here, I think, over the next decade. And I think we're just going to have to adapt to what that looks like. The reality is also this labor shortages too, where we're going to have to automate more, and that's going to be important with regards to the smart technology and IoT going forward.
That's a good point. And you mentioned the engineers there, some of the younger folks, as opposed to the machine operator. And I think that's the key too, that sometimes maybe isn't understood by that 25-year-old, as you say, actually going and talking to that machine operator and seeing from their perspective what the issues are, what's good, and then being able to take that information and understand to be able to apply it to the machine.
Yeah, and for data is only so good as you can turn it into information and feedback to make better decisions or to get better control. But yeah, so that is extremely important. I think sometimes it's you get paralysis by analysis, right? And that happens too. So we're all still learning how to
Mhm.
better use data, even in my day to day, just
Absolutely.
living, because there's just so much information out in the world now, that's accessible information that's out there.
There is. There is. That's true. Almost too much. honestly. It makes my ADHD pick up sometimes, Willie. I just, like a squirrel with shiny things. I can't concentrate on one thing with everything that's out there. So, what would you tell professionals in the industry, whether it's somebody younger that's cutting their teeth and coming up in the industry, or somebody that's been in the industry for a minute here, Willie? What skills or areas of knowledge would you tell them to concentrate on to be successful in the industry going forward?
Yeah, no, I mean, we were just talking about, I mean, things are moving so fast now. I think I heard somewhere that um, 25 or even more percent of the jobs that that will exist when a kindergartner graduates it doesn't even exist yet, right? There are jobs that are being developed, and so how do you tell a kid what they should be when they grow up? So I think the answer is just to continue to stay curious and adaptable, be lifelong learners. We do have resources like YouTube now and on-demand training and all this stuff where you can learn something, right? When I go out and need to, fix my toilet, I'm gonna Google and look at YouTube and find out, okay, how to do it, right?
Mhm.
So those at least those avenues for learning now exist in a lot of different places. And I think I listened to Mike McVeigh's message is you still have to have a level of technical. He was, he grew up as a salesperson, have a level of technical and analytical skills. So continue to learn about, anything you can, whether it be, tools like, AI, just continue to learn. I recently read a book, or I liked the book it was called Range, and it talks about specialist versus generalist. And the first example they gave was Tiger Woods and Roger Federer. Many of you know, for those of you who know, Tiger Woods is a great golfer. Roger Federer is a great tennis player. But Tiger Woods grew up and he just golfed since he was like 2 years old, and he learned golfing, and he was a specialist in golfing, which is a one way to go, and was obviously very successful. Roger Federer didn't really take up tennis until he was a teenager. He played, soccer or football in Europe, right? He played all these different sports, and eventually he, took up tennis. He was more of a generalist, but he could use all of the skills that he used in many of these other sports for tennis. And he was able to be successful there. And, you can be successful in both, but, with just directly with AI and automation doing very specific tasks, and the AI is going to be, and automation and computers are going to be very skilled at doing a single task, like, lifting something up and down over and over again. So the specialization is going to be more easily replaced. The ability to learn and be a generalist is going to be harder to replace. So, my recommendation is to, be able to adapt to whatever happens out there is, probably the primary recommendation.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head with both of those. Curiosity, that comes up a lot actually, and adaptability. Absolutely. And continuous learning, obviously. So, what would you say the biggest current challenges in fluid power?
Yeah, I would say two. The first one is actually just the labor and the talent pipeline, right? Everybody wants to, the thoughts of, I want to work in software, I want to work in computers. So really, how do we attract talent to fluid power? And I always say, it's not fluid power. We have to think about what we're doing. I mean, we're building construction equipment, we're building agriculture equipment. That's what we're doing. We're building airplanes, right? I mean, submarines, right? All of this stuff has,
It makes the
fluid
world
power in
run.
it,
That's what I
right?
always
Makes the
say.
world run. So I think that's, we don't do a great job of marketing, I think, and in terms of what we really do. So I think that's the biggest challenge is going to be our labor and talent pipeline and attracting talent, and that starts as early as possible to get people engaged. How many people like the more hands-on? I mean, I grew up as an electrical engineer, and my buddy, I said, I'm entering this whole fluid power industry, and he said, you know what? In electrical, you have Ohm's law, voltage equals current times resistance. He said, fluid power is the same way. It's pressure equals force over area. It's just at a macroscopic and not a microscopic scale. And you can actually see it. And how many people, Legos are much more popular than circuitry systems, because kids can build Legos, they can feel it and see it. So it should be an easier sell. I actually have a lot of construction going on, and you don't there. You can't imagine how many kids are lining the streets, sitting on the steps of their house, watching the vehicles do the construction. That's a love, and then how do you harness that to transition to a labor market? That's what we have to figure out.
Or maybe we should put the
Yeah.
simulators in every school. That would get all kinds of people excited if they could hop up in there. Some sort of virtual thing where they're running a backhoe
Yeah.
or a dozer or something like that.
And I think related to that, just I don't want to, I want to add to that is I think it's not a challenge, it's an interesting thing to look out for is as the industry consolidates, right? Eaton and Dan or Rex and Hydroforce, for instance. I mean, Parker's bought a lot. I mean, it really they focus on these big home runs, right? And this, these huge markets. Where can I get my biggest return on investment? And that leaves a gap. And also from a labor perspective, attraction, right? If I want to be, more innovative, I don't want to try out these ideals. Some ideals are killed for big companies because you don't get the ROI. There's an opportunity for at least smaller product-oriented businesses to maybe innovate these niche, but maybe higher value solutions. I'm reading a book actually by a friend of mine called Unconvention, and it talks about a lot of innovation that can often happen in small areas and these very niche high value where where a lot of people have passion too, right? Because that's the one thing I love about the industry. There's so much passion, right, in the industry, and I'm afraid that going back to the labor is as people are retiring and moving on, are we going to lose that passion and that pipeline? But I do see it in pockets of several colleagues too. So, I think that one of the advantages of the U.S. is the way we're structured is we have an ability for small business and incubation and small inventive companies to really thrive and experiment and grow. So I'm hoping that we can continue to leverage that in the fluid power industry.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point you make, and actually that leads into my question with your thoughts about the acquisitions that are going on and the impact on the industry, which it's pretty much asked and answered, but it's such an interesting time on both sides, the manufacturing side
Yes.
and the distribution side, Willie.
Yes, yes. Yes, I think the distribution side is the same way, right? Because they also want to have the buyer power, right? They see all the manufacturers consolidating, the distributors are also consolidating. Changes the game. But again, I think that there's going to be bigger companies move slowly. It's just going to be a fact. And there's a reason for it. There's going to be opportunities out there and for smaller companies to spring up, to thrive and survive. I think they're just going to the smaller companies are going to have to find their niche. Just going back to that book I just started reading, so I'm not done. They talked about bookstores, right? The example of bookstores when like the Barnes and Nobles and the Borders popped up, and then you had all these independent bookstores out there, and then actually then Amazon popped up and it actually ate the lunch of the Barnes and Nobles and Borders.
Mhm.
Borders, I don't know even how many Borders exist anymore, if they even exist. But the independent bookstores still survived because they were able to find what they did special, how do they service their customers better than some of these big players because they were, much more intimate with their customers. So there's going to be small businesses out there that may invent the next great thing, and they're going to need partners or distributor or integrator partner to help them with the automation, integration, fluid power solutions. And there's just not going to be as many. The big players may not want to partner with that small company down the street, but maybe some of the smaller companies will. So I think there's still an opportunity. So we just go through these cycles and waves, and I do think a lot of these smaller companies will start to pop up.
I think you're right, and agility is a key word there. And as you also said, the customer. It's agility, the way you treat your customer base, how you go to market that way will set you apart because it is the larger you get, the slower moving you are. It's just fact that way. So
Yeah.
I think you're right. And I think there's going to be an opportunity for, some of these smaller companies to really make headway in the current situation and in the next 10 to 15 years, certainly.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is an off the books, Willie. If you could go back to Willie, and this could be pre-Navy or pre-Eaton or both, what piece or pieces of advice would you give yourself?
Yes. I think for me, I mentioned earlier that I went to school and decided to major in electrical engineering. And, just going back to what we said, we were just talking about it. I think engineering and how many systems these days are purely mechanical, purely electrical, purely X, Y, or Z? Nothing. I wish I had spent more time at least, looking at kind of the entire more of a systems engineering approach because the reality is I didn't end up ever designing systems, but I utilized them, and it's about how everything goes together at the end of the day. So if it were me, I would have spent less time doing the very theoretical classes and more time working on more hands-on projects and learning how systems work. And even as we talk about integrators and distributors, I'm not sure if you will be successful even classifying yourself as a fluid power distributor. I think, for instance, I think you're going to need to understand how to, be an automation distributor or, something more than that as an integrator to combine a lot of different, partners and systems. So I think that's something that's going to transition over time. So I would tell myself to just learn a broader spectrum of technical knowledge and resources.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Again, considering the current climate, I call them hybrid engineers, but there's such a blur in systems anymore. Nothing's pure hydraulic or
Yeah.
pure electric or anything like that. And then having an understanding of motion control and that sort of thing, you really need to have that hybrid look at things. And so, in that respect, too, it's a very interesting time and will be.
Yes, yes, and we'll continue to be. And the great thing about it is, at least in most of the industries, the things are tangible. You can feel and see the results of machines and look at it. I have in the fluid power industry, I have a bias towards things I can see. So when I walk around conferences like Con Expo, I could always see the motors, right? Like that's one of our motors, right? Because oftentimes they're outside of machines. Or I used to run actually a cylinder and actuation business within Eaton. The cylinders you can often see, and then the fluid conveyance you can often see. Those are the three things you can see. Sometimes the valves of the pumps are embedded, so you can't even see it. So I always have a bias towards the parts that I can see.
I'm 100% with you there. It's always fun, and Connex is an animal of its own, but I always loved walking around and looking for product and the different applications. It's a cool
Yeah,
industry, right?
definitely.
That's
Yeah.
all you can say. Well, Willie, I so much appreciate your time. I know you're busy. I'm glad you took the time out to have a chat here, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Megan. It was a pleasure.
All right. Have a good day, Willie.
All right, take care.